Hello and welcome in the second video of this series where we are developing a simple React Pomodoro timer focusing on the basics of React. In the first video we created our dev env, setting our tooling, ESLint, Prettier and Parcel, and we create a very small React app just showing an hello world. In this video we are focusing on creating our components but just the visual aspects of our timer. We will do the logic and the logic of the timer in the next video. So we are focusing today on creating all the components we need to show a timer and the buttons we need. Before entering in that subject, we need to make a distinction that is really important in React world between what we can call smart component and dump component, which can also be referred as containers and component, or display component and logic component. There's a lot of name, but the concept still always the same. The main principle here is to have two types of components. Smart components that are just handling the logic and sending information to dump components, which just receive the information from the smart components and display them. The main advantages of using this structure is that we can create small reusable components, the dump one, because it's just like, okay, it's a button, it's receiving a title, a label, anything, and it's just showing what you need to show. It's not binded to your application, so you will create a lot of small components, bit like Lego bricks, that you can use at other place of your application or in other projects, in the way that you can maybe package this component in a separate module that you can upload on NPM or just host in a GitHub repository just for you and reuse it elsewhere. We can see in the small graph on the screen, that's the way of using that. We have a smart component that the smart component are the most top component in the structure, and they are handling anything, the logic, the state, and so on, and they are sending just what they need to the dump component. Each dump, but it's more dump component, that are just receiving props and show them. So in this part, we will focusing on creating the dump component. And for that, we will also need to handle the styles. And for the styles, we are going to use Bulma. Bulma is a very small CSS framework, working very well, very easy to use, lighter than React Bootstrap, and Bootstrap in particular. So for the small timer that we need to do, it's really nice to use. So we will start by simply install Bulma before creating any component. Oops, yeah, I should have just passed the comment here. Here's Bulma, and for install Bulma with Parcel, it's very easy and nice to do. I just simply need in my main entry point to require Bulma. As we can see, Parcel will automatically detect that Bulma is a SASS framework, so it will download SASS, configure anything, and know I have Bulma. Next thing to do to install Bulma is just So we just install Bulma, and then we need to ensure that we are using HTML file doc type, which is already the case. We can just load our index.html file here. We know that we are using the good doc type, and also add the responsive meta tag that we will add just right now. Okay, and that's all. since Bulma now is handled by a parcel, I don't need to do anything more. And as we can see, our application already changed. We now see that we are using a better font than the default one, which is handled by Bulma. So now we will create our display component. Before that, we will just commit what we did. Okay. So, as we said in the introduction of this video, we will focus on the dump component. So we need to create our first smart component that we will not do anything right now. We will define the logic in the next video. The main smart container that we will create a folder to host. src containers. We will call it simply Pomodoro. Usually in React application for the real world, big React application, the containers didn't host any HTML content. They are just calling dump components and showing them. Here we are working on a very small app, and I will just put 2 small div in it just to handle the application. It's a small small sacrifice that we can do. So we create our Pomodoro file. Oops. So this file will handle the whole logic of my component. For now, it didn't do anything. I will just create an empty component that I will call Pomodoro. And for now, we will ask him to host one div that will be the main div styled by Bulma. We will give him a columns is mobile and is centered classes, and he will also contain a div with class name column is alpha. That's all for now. We can already, if we want, just recall our hello component that we used in the previous states. It would be hello name. So we need to import it. Import hello from and that's all for now. We can just now replace here the Pomodoro, the hello with Pomodoro. And here we can add so we know what the role of this component is. So here we will change the tag and we will use the Pomodoro. As we can see here, now we have a bit of styling, which is just what I want. My only concern here is about the writing of the class. I'm not really a big fan of writing all the classes into a single string. I like to be able to manipulate my classes. And for that, I will install a simple package that is called class names, which is a very, very small utility that we can use like that. Class names from class names. And it's just a function that we call, giving all the classes we want one by one. The advantages of this function is that we can pass him table and they will flatten the table, so we have all the classes in the table. And we can also do stuff like that, like maybe active and is active. Class name will resolve this, and if it's returned false, he will just ignore it. If it's true, he will use the class. So that's useful. It's not a big deal, but that's always nice to have small utility package like that when you are working. And okay, nothing changes here. We create our first smart component that didn't do anything right now, but that's okay. Now we will focus on our display component or dump component, and for that we need to create two sections in our app. We need to create the timer that will show the minutes and seconds that are passing, and a small toolbar that will contain buttons. We will start with the display of the timer, and for that I will create a folder called display to contain our display component for the timer. For that I will create two files. I will use src component display index for the display component. I can also call them display, but it will say component display. We can use the default index.js here, and we will also use components display ciphers. Okay. The ciphers component is a really easy one, and it's the best example of a dump component. It will just receive a number to show, and it will just display component. It will just receive some number and show it in the way we want. For that, I will import the prop types, because we will define some, and I will create a component called ciphers. He will receive a prop called value, and I will simply ask him to show it in a span. The only manipulation that I will do here is that if the value is less than 10, I would like to show 0, 1, 0, 2, have a 0 before it. So we always have two numbers to show. For that, we will use the pad start method from the string. So we will convert a number to a string, and we use pad start. Pad start is very simple. It's if the string is less than 2 of length, we can just prepend with a 0. And that's all for the cipher. There's nothing else to add. We need to define the prop types. So we know that value will be a number and will be required. And don't forget to export our ciphers. Then we will see about our display component. The display component is very easy too. It just receives an amount of seconds and showing it with two ciphers. One cipher for the minutes and one cipher component for the seconds. So here I will import the prop types. I will import the ciphers because we are going to use it. And then I will make my display component. And it will be very easy. It will be a small div with the first ciphers component, a small span showing a column between them, and the other ciphers showing the second, so the minutes, the second. So first thing first, we will show the minutes, and for that we will simply do a math floor of the divisions of seconds by 60, sorry. And then for the second, we will simply show the rest of our division by using a modulo 60. And that's fairly whole. We will just do that, writing the prop types, which will be seconds, which will be a number and is required. We don't forget to export display component. And that's all for our timer. Nearly, we will add some stuff, but now we can replace our hello component with the display one from display. We need to give our amount of seconds. We will store it in a specific constant later, but for now, just as we are working only on the visual, we are just creating here an amount of seconds and just call the display with the seconds. As we can see here, we have 25. The 0 is written 0, 0, but it's a bit small. So we need a bit of styles because Bulma didn't really handle specific styles, and here we are really in a specific way of doing things. But no, maybe we can check if we have typography sizing, maybe size. Yeah, it's size 1, but it's really less than I wanted. So I would like to add my custom styles here. So I will just create a small folder that I will call styles, and I will create a styles main.scss. We will put it here, main.scss. And here we will put the display that will just use a font size of like 10, yeah, it's CSS, sorry, font size 10 rem and a text align of center. To use this style sheet, we will just go back to our app.js and import it here. So it's on the styles main SCSS. As Parcel already know how to handle a CSS file, we don't have anything to add. And here I will just add our class, which is called display. I will maybe call it timer display just to make it more easy to read. And now we have a more bold timer to show. And that's all for the display. We don't have anything else to add, so we will just commit that. And now we are focusing on creating our kind of toolbar, which will contain some buttons. As I said in the first video, we need 4 buttons, one to remove minutes, one to reset the timer, another one to play pause, and last one to add minutes to the timer. Here we are just going to create the two components, one for the button, one for the toolbar, and no, don't add any logic on it. The logic will be for the next video. So we will create a folder that we will call tools inside of the components folder, and we will create 2 components. One that will be the index, and the second one will be the button component. Starting with the button, this one is very easy because it's just a button, but we need to have a proper reflection of what we need inside a button. We know that Bulma have button classes to handle the buttons. We can choose the color, the styles, eventually the size and stuff, but we will just make classic buttons. But what we need to handle? So we need to handle the prop types, of course. I know that we will need to handle multiple class names, so I will import the class names utils, and I will just create my button. A button is of type button. I know that it can be other, but in here we don't need. We will also add the class name from Bulma. So we will use a button that will be, let's say, primary. That will also be medium-sized. And that will take most of the size it can. Okay, let's just say for the color, maybe this time we will use link 1. Is a color that I never use, so yeah, just here we will do blue buttons. Okay, so we know that the buttons need to have a type, and we also need to handle some stuff. We need to handle the label of the button. We need to maybe handle a title. And here we will do simple. If we don't have a title, we will reuse the label, just for the sake of it. And also we need to handle what happens when we click on the button. And as I said, here is a dump component. So I don't want for the button to handle its own click action. We will receive a callback from the parent. So from the parent, we will receive a label, a title. We also need to handle the disable status. That will be false by default. And the onClick. So disabled. And that's all for our button. So we also add the prop types. So the label, which is required, the title, which is not, disabled, which is a boolean, and we can say a boolean is required, but if we don't give a boolean, it's just considered as false. So yeah, it's okay for us. And we also need an onClick function that will be a function, and that is required because we want buttons that can do some stuff. So here are our buttons. And we don't need to forget to export it. That's our button. And now we will handle the tools. We know the tools, the toolbar will just display buttons, and then it needs to call the buttons with an onClick method. We know the onClick method will come from the Pomodoro, so we will already create those callbacks, so we are just good with it. So we will create, we need 4 callback, handle minus, and for now we were just going to make some console logs call. So handle reset, handle play pause, and handle plus. And that's all for now. So we can create our tools, our toolbar. And this one will be very simple too. We will create a prop types. Import prop types because we need it. We will also import the button because of course we will need it. And now our tools component. It will be a small div with some classes from Bulma. We need to say that it's just a flex. It's just a flex box with default behavior. The first button will be the minus one, so you will receive a minus label, a title that will say remove 1 minute. We also need to know if the timer is running. If the timer is running, the behavior will be different. So we know that we will receive a running prop. And here, for instance, we know the remove 1 minute button will not be clickable while the timer is running. So we just say disable running. And on click, we will use the on minus callback. So here we will receive it as, so running will be false by default, and we will receive an on minus callback. Then between each button, I would like to have a small space, just a small one. I don't want to play with margins and stuff. I will just add a small space, and I would like this space to be an unbreakable one. Unbreakable space, that is also called NBSP. We can write it like that. It's U00A0. But that's something that I will use maybe in other place. So for that, I will create a core folder that will contain a lot of small files and stuff, and we will create a constants files that will just handle constants. For now, I know it's a bit dumb, it will just contain a small constant that will just be an unbreakable space code, but we will fill it later with other stuff. So for now, we will just say NBSP constant will be U00A0. So here we can say import NBSP Okay, so now it's just better to use NBSP. It's more readable and we can use it elsewhere. The second button will be the reset button. A reset label, we don't really need a title because it can be the same. It will be disabled while running because we don't need to. And an on click that will be the on reset prop that we will receive from the parent. So on reset. We put a space here and then we have the play pause button. The play pause button is a bit more complex, but not so much. We just need to change the label regarding the state of the timer. If the timer is running, we can just say pause, else we can just say start. Then we can add a title too, that will be start or pause the timer. And here we'll add a small interpolation, saying pause or start the timer. We also need an on-click button, an on-click action, and will be start pause callback sent by the parent on start pause, and you know we have on plus, and the plus button will be the same as the minus, adding a space, just changing the add 1 minute, disable when running, and calling the on plus method. Here's for our small toolbar. We will write the prop types here. So running will be a boolean, so it don't need to be required. On minus will be a function and will be required. and we will have 4 of them on reset, on play, pause, and on plus. Don't forget to export, and that's all. So now inside our Pomodoro container, we can just import the tools. So we can say, okay, we will also define a small const running variable, because we will change it in the logic, but just for now it will say solid true. We need to import the tools, import tools from components tools, and so here we do tools, and we need to give him all the props we need. So the running one, on minus will be handle minus, on reset will be handle reset, on play pause will be handle play pause, and on plus will be handle plus. And for now that's all. Okay, we'll just check it. So now we can see, since running is true, we have a small issue that we will check, but since the timer is like running, we can only click on pause. By default, the timer should be not running, so we will change that. It will be false. We have a small issue that I need to handle. I think I've made a small... it's not on start pause, it's on play pause. Okay. So now we can just check it. Okay, so now when running is false, we can click on each button and we see that the buttons are making the console log that we do. So now, just to explain it well, we have our button. So when we are calling the tools, we are just giving those 4 functions as props. They will be received here and injected into the buttons. The button will receive the on click and having it here. So when I'm clicking on my button, I will call the function coming from Pomodoro. So the logic will stay into the Pomodoro container. So that's the stuff for now. We will make our commit, prepare constants files. Okay, and before finishing, because we reached the end of this part, I just want to add a small fun detail inside our display component. I would like to, when it's running, every time we have, I want this column to flash, to blink. Say like in the old timer we had a physical one, and we will just say, okay, if the seconds is an even number, it will be a bit of opacity. We will add a bit of opacity, less opacity on it. So for that, I will just go back to my cipher component. Oh no, the display one. And here in the display component, I will just add a small style prop that will be opacity, and if seconds modulo 2, if it's not 0, so it's an even number, opacity will be 0.5, and if not, opacity will be 1. So now, since this is a number, an even number, not an odd number. It's an even number, so I have 0, 0, and I have the column, solid column. And here, if I can say, okay, 1 second less, we see that the column is less bright. And so every time the second will change, we will have a small blinking behavior. And that's okay for that. Okay. One last thing to add, even though we will not using it here, it's, as we see when defining the buttons, we handle a lot of parameters, but we know that buttons can have more parameters, and maybe I don't know if I will use it, but if I want to make like reusable component, I can add a small stuff that will use a rest parameter, and we will call it props, saying if we have more props, I want to give them to the buttons. So here I will just say props. Maybe it's always a good thing to come back and define the props, but if we forgot, the button will continue to work by just get the extra props directly inside the buttons. I know we are not using that in this exercise, but it's just to showing you. And that's all for our display components. We have everything right now. We just need to handle the logic here to say, okay, when the seconds are passing, I need to handle that, and I need to handle the running state. And that's all for now. So we will finish with this video and we will handle the logic in the next one. See ya!